In 2017, researchers at University of Vienna divided 18 piglets into 3 groups. The piglets were placed into rooms that contained a food box, which could be opened by pushing or pulling a door with a snout. 2 groups of the pigs were able to observe their mothers or aunts use the door and get the food. The others had to figure it out on their own. The piglets who hadn't been able to learn by observation had to nose around to figure out how to get at the food. But the piglets who were able to observe another pig open the door were able to mimic the older pigs and got the food much faster.
This experiment is a demonstration of social learning, which basically posits that animals, humans included, learn by observing other animals, who model behavior for them. You can participate in social learning about unconscious bias, to show people how to be aware of and mitigate their own biases.
In 2015, University of Wisconsin professor Patricia G. Devine wanted to find out if there was anything we could do to lessen the impact of unconscious bias. Specifically, she looked at whether unconscious bias could be mitigated when it came to hiring in science, technology, engineering, and math, or STEM. Her own school's STEM departments only hired women at about a 32% rate, even though about 40% of STEM doctorates are awarded to women.
Devine suspected unconscious bias led to some of this disparity, so she trained half of the STEM departments at University of Wisconsin on evaluating and interrupting unconscious bias.
After 2 years, the departments that got the training were hiring women at a rate of 47%. Making people aware of what bias looks like and how it affects people led the departments to change the way they hire.
Unconscious bias is an inborn part of the ways people think, but with work, you can interrupt it and change it.
So, for example, you might notice that you have a slight bias against people with disabilities. That might mean that you find you haven't been assigning any high-priority tasks to a coworker who uses a wheelchair, even though them using a wheelchair has nothing to do with their ability to do the job. Once you recognize it, you can work hard when you're with people with disabilities to not let that bias affect how you treat them.
Recognizing a bias isn't easy, and I'm not saying it is. It's hard to find your biases, let alone admit to some of them. But once you recognize that you have a bias, I promise you'll already start to feel yourself mitigating it.
If you realize that you tend to interrupt people who belong to a certain group, you'll actually start to notice yourself doing it. And you'll be able to stop it sometimes.
You won't completely erase a bias overnight, but you'll make progress. You'll get better. And over time, it'll get even easier.
Functional MRI imaging has shown that when unconscious bias happens, when we look at a person and make the assumption, oh, they're not right for the job, or interrupt them without thinking based on the group they belong to, a part of our brain called the amygdala is activated. The amygdala is the part of our brain that processes fear. It tells the hypothalamus to activate our fight or flight response. And that activation of the amygdala takes as little as 15 milliseconds.
So when unconscious bias is active, you're in a physical and neurological process that moves really fast and is largely out of your control. But that doesn't mean that bias has to take over your decision-making. Just like you can calm yourself down if you get frightened, you can interrupt the process of unconscious bias.
In 2012, a group of economists at the University of Pennsylvania sent emails from fictional prospective graduate students to over 6,000 college professors. The emails all had the same content. They were asking for the professors to meet for 10 minutes to discuss research opportunities. The only difference in the emails was the names of the students. Some of them had stereotypically white names, some had stereotypically African American, Indian, Hispanic, or Chinese names.
Some of the names were women's names, and some were men's names. What the researchers found was that even though every email was the same, if it came from someone with a stereotypically white male name, it was 26% more likely to get a response from a professor than a minority or a woman.
What's really interesting is that these professors were diverse. They were from all races, genders, and socioeconomic backgrounds. Yet they were all biased towards white men.
The professors treated the graduate students differently based on the group they thought they were a member of. Their decision-making was affected by unconscious bias.